Hello friends, and welcome to part 9 of our Python for GenAI and LLM series. In this series, we'll talk about tuples. So in our earlier session, we talked about lists. So what we are going to cover in this session is we'll discuss about what is a tuple and what are its characteristics, and then we will cover how you can access tuple items. And then a very important concept with tuples is immutability. So we'll talk about immutability and how it's different in terms of its functioning than a list. And then we'll talk about some of the operations on tuples. And then we'll cover how you can iterate through these tuples, and we will be covering tuple methods later on: count, index, nesting, and packing and unpacking of tuples, right? So some other important concept associated with tuples. And then we'll talk about real life use cases. What are the applications of tuple where they're used in real time? And then we talk about some common mistakes that are made by developers and how you can effectively avoid it. And in the end, as always, we'll have a 5 questions quiz. So let's get started. So a tuple is an ordered immutable collection of item. It's pretty similar to list, but it cannot be changed once created. Tuples are faster, leaner, and more memory efficient than list. And they're used to store constants, basically. I mean, the data that is not supposed to change. And they are typically defined using parentheses. You can also use tuple constructor to define them. So let's go to our VS Code and let's get started with the tuples. So let's take an example of a tuple. Let me quickly create a code block and we'll create a tuple here. So I'll name it like my tuple, and let's give some values, and then I'll say print my tuple. Okay, so this is my tuple, right? And if I want to see the type, so I'll say print type and then my tuple. And here you can see the type as tuple. So you can create a tuple by using parentheses. Now let's see the different methods of creating tuples. So I'll put this session as creating tuples. Let me use markdown state. So that will look better. And tuples are typically created using parentheses. And there's another method that's called tuple packing. So we'll talk about it. And then you can also use tuple constructor. So let's take um, some examples of this one. Oh, with parentheses, it's what you have already created, right? So with parentheses, if you want to create, you can just say tuple1, or let's say t1 equal to 1, 2, 3. It can have duplicate items, of course, so it can be 1 to 2 also. It can also be created without a parenthesis, so that's an interesting thing. So that's also called tuple packing, where Python expect a single value. If multiple expressions are provided, separated by commas, they are automatically packed in a tuple. So let's just take an example of this one. So if I'll just say t2 equal to, and I'll say 4, 5, 6, right? And then let's try to see what it is. So I'll say print t2. Okay, you can see it has automatically, so Python has automatically packed it into a tuple. So whenever you will give multiple values where a single value is expected, right? And it's separated by the comma, Python will automatically pack it for you in a tuple, right? Third method is using tuple constructors. Let's say using tuples constructor. And so let's take an example. I'll say td equal to tuple. Now we're using the constructor, right? And here we can take a list and we can convert it to a tuple. And I'll just say 7, 8, 9. Okay. And then let's say print type T3. And here you can see the classes tuple, right? So we can use parenthesis to simply create a tuple. If we just give comma separated values, right, it will automatically create, or Python will automatically pack it in a tuple for us. And third one is we can convert a list into a tuple using tuple constructor. Next, let's talk about tuple characteristics. So I'll just create a new section, tuple characteristics. Okay, so it's basically a ordered list, right? So let's see, it's ordered, and you can access it. The different items, but in the tuple you can access using the index, and it's immutable. So we'll talk about it in detail um, in a bit. So cannot modify basically. And third, it can have duplicate items, of course. So it allows duplicates just like lists, and it can store different data types. So what I'll do is I'll leave a copy of this Python notebook file in my GitHub, and I'll leave the link in the description of this video so you can refer it. Now let's take some more examples of tuples. So let's say mixed tuple equal to, and here we can give some random values, right? 1, 3.14, hello, true. That's a Boolean value, right? And then again we can say hello. Okay, and then I'll say print mixed tuple, and you can see it's accepted as a tuple, right? So it can have mixed values. Oh, sorry, there is something that took two values actually. Let me add a dot here instead of a comma. I intend to add a comma only, right? So you can see all these values, they have been accepted as a tuple, right? Next, how you can access tuple items. So let's see, accessing tuple items. So you can use positive and negative indexing here. I'll say positive and negative indexing, like you used to do in list, right? So if you have not gone through our earlier session about the list, I would highly recommend you go through that session first, and you can see the link in the top right side of this video. And next, you can also slice them. So slicing works the same as lists. And then let's take some example of this one. So let me add a code block here. And here, let me create a tuple. I'll say fruits equal to, and here, let's give some fruit names. So I'll say apple, banana, and let's take maybe cherry and date. Okay, now let's take an example of positive index. So I can say print, and then I'll index fruit, and let's say I want to print banana, right? So I'll say print fruit 1, and Okay, there is a spelling mistake. It's not fruit, but fruits. And yeah, so I said print fruits 1, and it has printed item number 1. So remember, these items are 0, 1, 2, 3, right? Similarly, if I want to use a negative index, right? Negative index, what I'll do is I'll say print fruits, and then I'll say -1, right? So it will print the last item for me. And then I can also do slicing. So like we used to do in lists. And to do slicing, what I'll do is I'll say print, and then I'll say fruits. And let's say I want to print these two items, banana and cherry. So I'll say one colon 3, and it will print banana and cherry for me. So 0, 1, 2, 3. When I say 1, 2, 3, right? What it will do is it will start from index 1 and it will print one item before 3, that is 2, right? So it will print 1 and 2 for me. I hope you got this concept. Next, we'll discuss about immutability, right? So that's another very important concept here. Uh, let's see, immutability in tuples. So what is immutability? Once a tuple is created, right, you cannot change its content. No adding, no removing. Let me just write it. No adding, no removing, no changing items. So that makes tuple unique and different than lists, because remember, lists are mutable. You can modify lists freely. If at all you ever want to modify a tuple, you need to convert to a list, modify it, and then convert back to tuple, right? So if you ever have to modify a tuple, you have to convert it to a list and then modify and convert it back. Okay, so let's take some examples of mutability so you will get a better idea about it. And let's add another code block. So lists are mutable, right? So let's create a list first. So I'll say fruit list, and let's give some values here. So I'll say apple, banana, and maybe I'll take cherry. And then I'll say uh, fruit list. So let's replace our item number 1, that is banana, with something else. So let's say fruit list 1 equal to blueberry. And then let's print our fruit list, print fruit list, and let's see. So you can see banana is replaced with the blueberry. Now let's try to perform the same operation with the tuple. So I'll say tuple is immutable, and I'll say fruit underscore tuple, and similarly let's just do the same thing, and I'll say apple, banana, and cherry, right? And let me do the same thing, fruit tuple 1 equal to blueberry. And let's try to execute this, and you can see this error, right? So it will say type error, tuple object does not support item assignment, right? So that's the idea about immutability. And that makes tuple uniquely useful in use cases where you want to save a number of constants in Python. Next, let's talk about the operations that we can perform on tuples. I'll say operations on tuples. So you can concatenate. So I'll say concatenate using a plus operator. And if you want it to be repeated, repetition, repetition using asterisk, and then you can do membership testing using in, and you can also do uh, length finding, right? So I'll say finding length. Okay, and let's see some examples of this one. So let's just add the hash here to make it look better, and we will go to our code block. So here, let's take an example of each one of them. So let's define two tuples here. So I'll say A equal to 1 and 2, and B equal to 3 and 4. Okay, and then I'll say print A plus B, right? So it will just concatenate, it will create a single tuple, and there it will add the values of both these tuples. So 1, 2, and 3, 4. So we can see 1, 2, 3, and 4. Similarly, what we can do is we can say uh, print, and let's say A asterisk 2. Okay, and let me print, right? So you can see it will not multiply the items within the tuple. If we want to do that, we have to unpack the tuple. But rather what it will do is it will just repeat the items that are in A. So we can see 1, 2, 1, 2, 2 times. So keep in mind, if you do a tuple asterisk and then a number, right? It will just repeat the tuple items that number of times, right? And third one is, let's say we want to test for a particular item if it exists in the tuple. So I'll say print and then I'll say 2 in A, right? So this item value 2, right? It's a part of tuple A, right? So it has returned us true as a value. So that's how you can do a membership test in tuple. Next, you can also check a length of a tuple, and to do that, you can say print len, and then you can say uh, B, right? So it will tell us the length of the tuple. It has two items, right? So that's what the length of the tuple is, right? And you can also iterate through tuple, right? So let's just add a markdown here, and I'll say iterating through tuples. So you can use for while or enumerate. So either of them can be used through tuple. Enumerate, if you have not came across it earlier, it's a function that adds a counter to each item in a list or other iterable. It turns the iterable into something you can loop through, where each item comes with its number. We can also turn it into a list of numbers, items, or pairs using list. And you will just see an example of this enumerate also shortly. So let's just add a code block here and let's create a tuple. I'll say new equal to, and 1, 2, 3. Just add some space, that looks better. And then I'll say for loop first. And for loop is simple, right? So for num in nums, and then you have to give a colon, and then I'll say print num, right? So you can see it's printing each item now in a different row, right? So that's how you can extract the items. And next, let's take example of while loop. So let's see while loop here, and here you can just say let's create a variable I equal to 0, and then you can say while I is less than len of the tuple, right? Len nums. Then what I want to do is I want to print, and then I'll say num print num and I, and then you have to increase the value, right? We want to do incremental I plus equal to 1, right? So that the statement is equal to I plus 1. And let's say and oh, I think there's a mistake. Where is the mistake? Okay, I equal to 0 while I less than len nums print nums I. Okay, so we have typed num instead of nums, right? So yeah, you can see the outcome is the same. 1, 2, 3 is again printed by our while loops, right? Next, let's take example of enumerate. So I'll say enumerate, and for enumerate, we'll say for index. You can also say I, but let's say idx for index. So for index, comma num in enumerate nums, and then you have to enter column, and then we'll use some f string literals here. So I'll say print, and then f uh, index, and here I'll say idx colon, and here I'll say num, right? So it will print each of the item along with its index. So that's how you can use the enumerate. Index 0, the value is 1, index 1 value is 2, and index 3, index 2 value is 3, right? Next, let's talk about tuple methods. So let me add a markdown, and I'll say number 8. And here we'll say tuple methods. Okay, so methods are count. So it's basically value, and it's more like how many times value appeared, right, in the tuple. Similarly, you can also do index, that will index of a value. So index of a value will basically give you the first index of that particular value in the tuple, right? So let's take an example of this one. Uh, let's create a tuple. So I'll say t equal to, and then we'll give some repeatable values: 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2, right? 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2, and then I'll say print. And here I'll say t dot count, right? This is a method. So t dot count, and there I'll get the value for which I want to do this count. So I'll say print t dot count 2, right? So you can see that 2 has occurred 3 times in this tuple: 1, 2, 3, right? Similarly, you can also check the index of a particular item. So if I'll say print, and then I'll say t dot index, and here I'll say 3, and let me execute. Sorry, what's wrong here? Print t dot. Okay, my spelling is incorrect. Okay, so t dot index 3 is 0, 1, 2, 3. So 3 has come at number 3 in the index, right? So count will give us how many times a particular item has occurred in a tuple, and index will give us the index value of that particular item. Next, and another important concept is nesting and unpacking of tuples. Let's see, 9, nesting and unpacking tuples. So you can basically nest tuples inside one another, right? And then unpacking is a different concept. So unpacking tuples into variable means when we create a tuple, we normally assign values to it. So this is called packing a tuple, as we have mentioned earlier. But when we want to extract the values back into variable, right? This is called unpacking. So I'll just mention unpacking, and then we'll also test some example of using asterisk for unpacking a tuple, right? So let's go to these examples one by one. Let me add a code block here, and first we'll say nested tuple, and here we'll define a nested tuple. So I'll say nested equal to, and I'll say 1 2 3, and it's a tuple inside a tuple, right? So I'll say 1 2 3, and then I'll add a comma, and then I'll say 4, and let's create a mixed tuple 4 apple 5, and then we'll say let's add another tuple here. I'll say 3.14 comma 6 comma 7. Okay, so this is what is called a nested tuple, right? If I say, so let's say I want to access a particular item, right? Let's say I want to access the first item of the first tuple. So what I can do is I can say print, and then I can say nested, and then I can say 0, right? And let's try to execute this. So you can see it has printed the first item of the tuple, that is 1 2 3, right? This is our first tuple. Next, let's say I want to access a particular item within tuple 1 of this nested tuple, right? So let's say I want to access maybe this apple out of this entire nested tuple. So what I can do is I'll just say print, and then I'll say nested, and then I will say this is our, let me just, okay, this is our 0 1 2, so this is our tuple number, index is 1 for this one, right? And then again for apple within this tuple the index is 1, so I'll say print nested 1 1, right? And let me execute. So you can see we are able to access the apple. So that's how you can access particular items within a nested tuple, right? Next, let's talk about unpacking. So let me see unpacking here, and let's take an example of coordinates. So I'll say coordinates equals, and then I'll say 10 and maybe 20, right? And I want to unpack it, right? So I want to basically extract the value and assign it to variables. To do that, what I'll do is I'll simply say x, y equals coordinates, right? And then I'll say print x, so that will print the value of our first variable, and y will print the value of the second item in the tuple, right? So I'll say print x, and then let's also say print y, and then let's execute it, right? So you can see it has printed the first item of the tuple as print x, and second item of the tuple when we did a print y, right? Let's take another example of unpacking. So let's take another tuple. I'll say fruits, and within it I'll just add some fruits, apple, let's add banana, and then maybe let's add cherry. Okay, and I want this values to be extracted from this tuple, right? So what I'll do is I'll say green, and then sorry, I'll say green, um, and then I'll say yellow, and then I'll say red, right? And here I'll say equals fruits, right? So you know what will happen here, right? So if I'll print green now, it should print our first item of the tuple, right? So I'll say print green, and it has printed apple, right? Similarly, if I'll say print yellow and print red, right? So you can see we are able to print each item of the tuple. So the value is assigned to these variables that we have used here, right? So fairly simple. That's how you unpack a tuple. There is another interesting concept in tuples that comes by using asterisk. So let me just say using asterisk. Okay, so let's take an example. So let me again create another tuple by the name of fruits, and let me give some value here. So I'll say apple, banana, and then cherry, and then strawberry, and then raspberry. Okay, so here, right, let me again try to unpack, but this time we'll use asterisk. So I'll say green, and then I'll say yellow, and then I'll say red, right? And before red, I'll just add a asterisk. So what it will do is it will assign the values that come after green and yellow, all those values to red. So let's see it in action, and I'll say equals fruits, right? And then let me try to print green, yellow, and red again. So I'll say print green. We know what will be printed here. And then I'll say print yellow and print red, right? And let me execute, right? So what it did is green, you can see it has printed apple. When we said yellow, it has printed banana. But when we said red and we used asterisk before red, right? So all remaining values it assigned to red as a list. So you can see red has become a list with all remaining values after apple and banana, right? So let's take another example of using asterisk. Again, let's create another tuple by the name of fruits only. The fruits equal to, and then let's say apple, banana, and let's use papaya this time. And then I'll say pineapple, and then I'll say cherry. Okay, and this time we will use asterisk in a different way. So what we'll do this time is I'll say green, and then I'll say asterisk tropic. Okay, and then I'll say red and equals fruit, right? So what will happen is when I use something with asterisk, a variable with the asterisk in the middle, first value will be assigned to green. So apple will be assigned to green. Last value, cherry, will be assigned to red. And whatever is left, right, whatever is in between them will be assigned to tropic, right? So let's try to print each of them again. So I'll say print green. And then I'll say print tropic, and then I'll say print red, right? So again, tropic will be assigned all the values in between as a list. So let me just scroll it up and execute it again. right? So again, you can see green's value is apple, tropic is assigned all these items, banana, papaya, and pineapple. And then red is assigned the last line item that was cherry in the tuple, right? So next we'll talk about some workarounds that may be required if you want to make changes to the objects within a tuple. So sometimes it may be required, right? So let's take a couple of examples here. Let me add a markdown and I'll say immutability workarounds. So as we know, right, we can't modify tuples, right? So what we need to do is we need to convert them to lists and then modify and then convert back to tuple. So that's how you can do it, right? Let's try to take one or two examples of this one. Let me add a code block here and let's create a tuple. So I'll say t equal to 1, 2, 3. Let me add a space here. T equal to 1, 2, 3. Now, if we want to append t, right? If we do t dot append, and then I'll say 4, right? It will result in an error because append functionality is not supported for a tuple, right? So what we can do is we can create a temp object here. So I'll say temp is a variable and I'll say temp equal to list and we'll convert this tuple into a list, right? And then we will say temp dot append and then I'll say 4, right? So now this is successful, right? So the object is appended in our temp list. And then what we can do is we can convert that list back to tuple. So I'll say t equal to tuple and then I'll say temp, right? And then I'll say print t. Okay, so you can see the object is appended towards the end. So similarly, if at all it's required for you to make changes in the objects within a tuple, what you need to do is you need to convert the tuple to a list, make changes and then convert it back to the tuple. So let's talk about some real life use cases around tuple. When do you think we need to use tuples, right? So let me see. Real life applications. So where you need to do is, for an example, for a storing of coordinates, right? They will not change, right? For a particular location. Or sometimes when a function returns multiple value, right? So as returning multiple values from functions. Another use case will be database query results. So let's say you have to save rows of database query results, right? That's where tuple can add a lot of value and also other immutable configuration like RGB colors or something, right? So that's where you can use the tuple. So these are the real life use cases for tuples, right? And then we'll also talk about some common mistakes to avoid. So I'll say 12 common mistake to avoid. Okay, and let me add a uh, code block here. So typically, right, you can forget adding comma in a single item tuple, right? That's where many errors can come, right? So for an example, if I say, let me say wrong single item tuple, and if I say wrong equal to 5, right? And then I'll say print type Wrong, right? So you can see it's an integer, it's not a tuple. So you can create a single item tuple, but to do that, what you need to do is you need to add a comma after that, right? So I'll say wrong equal to 5, comma, right? And then again I'll say print type wrong, right? So you can see once you add comma after it, right, it's converted to the tuple. Another place where people typically make mistakes is when they try to modify tuple objects directly. You cannot do it, right? What is the workaround is again, like we covered earlier, convert it to list and then do it and then convert it back. Second, don't get confused with tuple packing and unpacking. They are fairly simple and straightforward concepts. When you will do it more frequently, right, you will get better idea, and that anyways we'll be going to do in future sessions. So now coming back to our slides. So I have some questions for you before you leave this session, and you can put the answer in the comment section below, and I'll give hers to all the right answers so that other friends know what is the right answer. So first question is, what will be the output of this following code? T is a tuple 1, 2, 3, 4, and we are trying to print T 1, 2, 3, right? Will it be A, B, C, or D? So put your answer in the comment box below for question 1. Question number 2 is, which of the following will correctly create a single item tuple? Will it be single equal to 5, single equal to 5, comma, single equal to tuple 5, or single equal to 5? Third question is, what will happen if you try to modify an item inside a tuple? Let's say T is a tuple 1, 2, 3, and I'll say T is 0 equal to 10. Right? So put your answer in the comment box below. And fourth is, which statement about tuples is false? Tuples can store elements of different data types. Tuples can be nested inside other tuples. You can add new elements to a tuple after its creation, or tuple preserve the order of elements. So put your answer in the comment section. And last question is, look at this code that is mentioned below. What will a result contain? Option number A, B, C, or D. So I would suggest you test all these scenarios in your VS Code or whichever interpreter you are using, and post your answers in the comment box. So that's it for this session. Before you leave, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the complete Python course for generative AI.